Let me tell you about a story. Now when men are talk bound about their law enforcement, a right bunch of clowns, how they wear their badge like a plastic crown, how they're sticking to a story of which they are now bound. It's a rabbit hole they don't want you to go down, but over in Wisconsin, they're doubling down.
Hello everybody, how are you today? You are tuned in to Eric Jose on Making a Murderer on YouTube. I go over Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey's cases. I also go over other cases as time goes by. I go over the documents, the pictures, videos, anything really case related for that matter. And I have many other videos that you can check out, just like the one you're about to see. Hello everybody, how you doing? Today we're here in honor of Wrongful Conviction Day, which for those who don't know is coming up here on October 5th. So it's the day to talk about wrongful convictions, ones you know of, and tell people that, you know, maybe don't know about Wrongful Conviction Day, and tell them about, you know, the case that you think is just the most egregious, that, you know, that is a good example to share with them, and that sort of thing. But anyways, Wrongful Conviction Day, so it's coming up. Today, right now, as I record this, is the night of the 2nd of October. So it's basically 3 days away. It'll be on Friday. Anyway, so get on Twitter and get on Facebook. I mean, they're calling it a Wrongful Conviction Day Twitter takeover. And they mean that in the sense that so many people will be doing it that it will be like a huge deal. It'll be a huge portion of Twitter's content for the day. Posts about wrongful conviction. If you haven't seen it for Wrongful Conviction Day, they usually have whoever the wrongfully convicted is, and they have it with the special coloring that you may notice. I have it on some of my Scott Davis videos if you've ever noticed. But anyways, so what we're here to talk about today is wrongful convictions. We're going to be hearing from Zellner because I was going through her award ceremony again and just thought there was something there that was, I think, worth sharing again, just picking out some of the snippets of it that I think are particularly interesting. But I encourage anybody to watch the whole entire thing, which I will leave a link to in the information below, of course. And I certainly encourage anybody to do that. But the thing that I wanted to kind of show everybody here is two things. The first clip we're going to watch is where Zellner talks about the number of wrongful convictions in the United States, and she kind of talks about how we have more prisoners per capita than the rest of the world, and that sort of thing. So she goes and she talks about a few things here. She brings up a statistic, and then she brings up why a law professor of hers pointed out that statistic is far more crucial than some people like to think. So I'm going to let her explain it to you first, and I'll come back and give you my thoughts on it before we go to the next clip.
With the investigation, we really thought we were good at it, and that there wasn't anyone else that was providing the service that we provided. What's happened in the last 5 years is we've seen an explosion of these cases. It's estimated now most of the exonerations come from murder and rape cases, and that 5% of the people convicted of murder or rape in this country are in fact innocent. So someone was saying, but aren't you still just talking about a small fraction of the total number of people convicted of felonies? Well, actually it's a significant number, and I heard a law professor say, let's just say, he said, let's look at the data from the airplanes that fly in and out of the Atlanta airport in a week. 18,000 flights in and out. If 5 of those flights crashed in that week, the airport would be shut down. There would be such concern about the fact that the system had so failed that there would be a complete investigation of why this had happened. So with the wrongful conviction cases, we're now up over 2,000 cases, and it is a fraction of the number of people that are incarcerated for life or a substantial sentence that are in fact actually innocent. The estimates run as high as 20,000. Now, we have the largest number of people incarcerated in the world in the United States. There has been an effort now to figure out how do these cases go wrong, what happens in these cases to make someone end up wrongfully convicted. And there's been a lot of data generated. There's been a call for an effort to systematize throughout the country all of the data and to have law enforcement using the data. But I can tell you from my experiences that a lot of the things that have been identified, like misidentification of eyewitnesses, false confessions, incompetence of trial defense counsel, all of those play a role in what has happened. But the reason that we continue to have wrongful convictions is we have not held the people accountable who are responsible for these wrongful convictions. What we've done is we've provided them with immunity. So law enforcement officers, and I'm sure many of you saw the case last week of the policewoman in Dallas that went into the wrong apartment. She was intoxicated. She shot the individual in the apartment and killed him. And of course, they will claim that she has qualified immunity because she's a police officer. What's happened is the qualified immunity that we provide to police officers in shootings or in these wrongful conviction cases has really become absolute immunity. They have a complete shield because of the way our courts have been interpreting the case law. So what the courts have said is with the Civil Rights Act, the section 1983, and the Civil Rights Act goes back to 1871, but the provision of it where a private citizen can sue a municipal government and sue anyone acting under color of law, i.e. police officers, prosecutors. The interpretation of that statute has gradually evolved to the point where the courts are saying, unless you can show us an identical factual pattern, we are going to uphold qualified immunity for the state actor. So the state police officer will get qualified immunity. Even more disturbing is that prosecutors are given absolute immunity. So you may think, well, gee, I mean, most prosecutors, if you've ever met one, they seem like decent people. They went to law school. They seem to be fulfilling. The problem is, of the 2,000 plus wrongful convictions, 84% of them involve prosecutors concealing evidence, coercing witnesses, helping to get false confessions, and basically hiding. The biggest problem is hiding evidence. And so the Supreme Court has now, just in the last month, issued two opinions that indicate that there may be some consensus developing from the far right to the far left. So Justice Sotomayor authored an opinion recently about the fact that qualified immunity has turned into absolute immunity for police officers. And Clarence Thomas, at the opposite end of the spectrum, has agreed that the doctrine has been basically turned on its head because the courts are refusing to decide new precedent that could be used. And so the attorneys end up in a position where they cannot make the case to show there's been a clear constitutional violation because they can't show the same factual pattern. That's developed in the civil side. On the criminal side, more egregiously, the Anti-Terrorism Act, which was passed in 1996, has resulted in a similar outcome where it is not possible in federal court to appeal a wrongful conviction case unless, once again, you can show the identical factual pattern existed in your case, and that's how you get to raise the constitutional violation. So let me give you a real-life example of that. This year, those of you that are familiar with the Making a Murder series, there were 2 individuals in that convicted. One was a 16-year-old. Many people worldwide saw the video of his confession. There were multiple ethical violations about that. He knew nothing about the crime. He gave all of these answers that made no sense, and the police basically told him what to say, and they videotaped all of it. You would think that that case would be overturned on that constitutional violation, coercion of a confession. And it was. It was overturned at the federal district court level. Then it was overturned, it was affirmed at the 7th Circuit level, and then it was totally shut down in an en banc hearing about 6 months ago by the entire court, and the U.S. Supreme Court said they would not take the case. So even though there was a global response to seeing this 16-year-old without a parent present, being misled and fed information, having his own attorney basically sell him out, trying to get him to plead guilty, even though everyone could see it, and even though there was some initial success with it, it was ultimately shut down because of this federal statute, the anti-terrorism statute, because the 7th Circuit said, well, the last coerced confession we decided of a juvenile was 50 years ago.
Okay, so stat of the day for wrongful conviction day, right? 5% of all the people found guilty of rape or murder, 5% of all of those are innocent. That's the projection, right? That's because of the numbers that are coming out, the data that's coming out with the Innocence Project, and what they're doing, and then what DNA is doing, and more lawyers are taking on post-conviction stuff. So this area is growing. Okay, and as was said in one of the briefs for Brendan, one of the amicus briefs for Brendan, it's actually, the numbers are ballooning, is how the Innocence Project described the data that's beginning to come in as time goes by, that it's starting to mushroom, meaning get, what a mushroom shape like. So as time goes on, it's getting, right? So this is really undeniable at this point. I mean, so that stat of 5%. Now, she brought it up now people said, oh, well, that's still just a small amount, right? Of the incarcerated people, right? Like no big deal, right? Well, then she talks about her law professor and the example he gave. And by the way, she said if just 5 planes, right? If just 5 planes crashed in or around Atlanta airport in a month, the airport would get shut down. There would be a huge investigation launched into why 5 planes, went down there and stuff, right? Okay, so now 5 planes is not 5% of 18,000, by the way. No. Because 5 planes is 5% of 100. Okay? 5 planes is 5% of 100 planes. Okay. If you have 18,000 planes, okay, you basically have 180 100s. Okay, so you have to take 5 times 180, essentially. That would be equivalent. That would make, that's basically just the math of how you would make the 5% of 18,000, right? You're going to figure out how much that is. So if I know 100 goes into 18,000 180 times, then I know, okay, I can take 5 times 180, and that's going to tell me how many planes 5% is, right? So when it comes out, it's 900 planes. 5% of the planes, if it was actually 5% instead of just 5, right? But if it was actually 5% of planes, we're talking about 900. Here, let me show you. We're talking about 900 planes. That's what 5% of 18,000 would be. Okay? And she's saying how just 5 planes would shut that airport down. And I think it's a fair equivalency, because you think about it. When those 5% that are wrongfully convicted, you are taking away their freedom, their life. You've broken up their families, most likely. There's a lot of times where women just leave their man when he gets convicted. Even if they believe he might be innocent, they just don't want to wait around or whatever. I mean, it destroys lives. So when you wrongfully convict somebody, it's a big deal. It's a huge deal. And it doesn't just affect the one person, because that one person usually has other people in their life that they're connected to that care about them. And it affects a lot more than just the person that you're wrongfully convicting. So that's, in case that had never been thought of. But so, and she also brought up in this lecture, which I encourage everybody to go to click the link down below in the info and watch the entire thing. But she also talks about how that prosecutors are just notorious for hiding evidence, and that's a big cause of wrongful convictions, and that a lot of wrongful convictions happen around election time when these DAs are trying to get reelected, and so they're trying to rack up as many convictions as possible to be, to make them as strong as possible going into the election and that sort of thing. And that this, because people feel, these prosecutors feel a pressure to do this, to boost themselves at election time, it causes a lot more wrongful convictions at those times. We can see the indicators, we can see the trends, this stuff, the data's coming out. Eventually, it's going to be undeniable. I mean, it's kind of undeniable now. It's, kind of silly right now to watch what has been happening with, like, Brendan and Stephen. Like, they're just, it's kind of disturbing to see how much flack and resistance there is, even though Zellner has really come up with expert witness accounts and expert experiments that throw a lot of doubt into most of the prosecution's evidence. So, speaking of that, now we're going to listen to Kathleen talk about the evidence in Stephen's case. And she's going to kind of go through it, each kind of piece of evidence that she views. She goes through 4 or 5 of them here. And she kind of goes through and points out what her issues are and what her experts found out about each individual one and stuff. She starts out talking about, which is interesting, folks, so pay attention. She starts out talking about how she originally declined Stephen. Because Stephen had written her before, long before MAM came out, and had asked for her help. And when she looked at the case superficially, she was just like, wow, there's just so much evidence against him. They didn't feel like they could take the case. But when she watched MAM, and you'll hear her say it here in the video, it's just interesting to me. But yeah, she eventually decided how really superficial this evidence is. There's evidence in the right places, but it doesn't look right, and it doesn't seem right, and it doesn't, you know what I mean? If you scratch the surface a little bit on all of this evidence, there's major issues. The bullet, for me, she points out that the bullet doesn't have any bone in it, right? Which is a huge deal. It truly is. But for me, the other issue about it is that it's clearly sitting on top of the concrete dust from when they jackhammered the floor. Okay, folks, lead is heavy. It's one of the heaviest elements. Or, they use it to shield radiation. It's just a dense element. It's heavy by nature. If they were jackhammering in there and everything, the concrete dust would have been all over it, and it would have been embedded into the dust, but it's not. It's sitting on top of this concrete dust from when they jackhammered the floor. Right? So that's the other issue with that bullet. So anyway, I'm going to let her tell you guys about her issues with the evidence and stuff, and we'll come on back one more time.
I want to shift gears just a little bit. You mentioned, we talked a lot about prosecutorial misconduct, and we've talked about judicial bias, but one of the things that you consistently mentioned is incompetent representation at trial. Yes. Where do lawyers go wrong? At the trial level?
I know exactly where they go wrong, okay? Let me tell you, this is what criminal defense attorneys do, and that's one of the reasons you want to watch the second series of Making a Murder. What they do is they don't hire experts. Now, in Making a Murder, the state had 14 experts. The defense had $350,000, and they hired one expert who was a forensic anthropologist, and he looked at photographs and never even examined the bones. What they do is they pocket the money. And so what we do now on post-conviction is we raise that, and we've been very successful at doing it. If you don't have an expert, a forensic pathologist, like the case I talked about in Arkansas, if you have not brought in a DNA expert, a blood spatter expert, a ballistics expert, if that's part of the evidence, then we raise your ineffectiveness. It is a constitutional violation. And the courts are responsive to that. And you're going to see, you know, when I watched the first series of Making a Murder, I saw, and I'll tell you why I took the case. He had written to us, and we had looked at it just from what the courts had filed, and I saw there was all this forensic evidence against him. His blood was in the car. His DNA was on her car key in his bedroom. Her bones were in his burn pit. The bullet in his garage had her DNA on it. It's like, whoa, we were like, no way, we don't want to take this case. Then I watched the documentary and I thought, oh, wait a minute. This forensic stuff is bogus. I can tell by watching it how unbelievably superficial it is. No photographs are even taken when they find the bones. They keep the county pathologist from coming on the property. So I thought, I'm going to take it and I'm going to hire world-renowned experts. I'm going to do ballistics, blood, and if I dump a ton of money in it, I'm going to do it because I think this guy's innocent. I'm even going to do brain fingerprinting that the CIA does on him. That's where I started, and he passed that. So guess what we found? Okay, this is fascinating. So with the blood in the car, one of the leading blood spatter experts in the world said, oh, it's obvious. Somebody stood at the driver's door and they dripped in 6 little drops of blood. He said, what we did was we tried to duplicate what happened with blood on someone's hand dripping, because supposedly his finger was cut. And amazingly, the blood ended up in 12 more places in the car. It was on the door handle, the gear shift, the brake. It was on the hood release, all of those things. We thought, wow. He said that blood is planted. So I thought, okay, what about those bones in the burn pit? So I hired John DeHaan, probably the leading fire forensic expert in the world, and he said, there wasn't a body burned in that burn pit. He said, there's absolutely no evidence. And he's actually burned human bodies more than anyone in the world, which is a weird occupation. But this is the guy that knows. And he said, there was no body burned there. He said, a barrel was used and 40% of the bones were tipped into the burn pit. So someone poured bones into the burn pit. He said, the teeth are missing. He said, the teeth never melt. And he said, if you had burned at a crematorium level of heat at this burn pit outdoors, you would have burned down the garage and blown up the propane tank. He said, you could not sustain the temperature degree for the bones. I thought, whoa, that is wild. He said, it's totally fabricated. No body burned in there. So I thought, okay, we knocked that one out. Then I went to the hood latch. I said, well, my clients, DNA is on the hood latch. So I got DNA scientists, and they did the experiments. And we took people, and they opened the hood latch over and over and over again. Guess what we found out? We found out that the amount of DNA on the hood latch is 90, the times quantity that would have been left if a person had just opened the hood latch. So then we started tracking where is the swab that was taken from Mr. Avery and substituted in as the hoodlike swab? And we found it. They took 2 groin swabs from him when they'd arrested him for a gun charge. So we're like, what are you doing groin swabs when somebody's arrested for a gun charge? They pocketed the 2 groin swabs because we knew it was going to be epithelial DNA, and then they turned those to the crime lab. So that was the hoodlike. But here's the one I love, and it's terrible. The state's theory was she was shot twice in the head, and the state's theory was that the .22, which is very soft lead, was lying right there in Avery's garage. They missed it the first 6 times. They were in the garage, couldn't find it. Then they found it, and they said, whoa, it's got her DNA on it. So I asked them, can I have the projectile? I want to take it to my lab. So I took it to Microtrace, which solved the Unabomber case, numerous airline crashes. It's probably the best forensic trace lab in the world. And they looked at her under a microscope, a very advanced, sophisticated microscope, and they said, well, that bullet's got red paint on it and wood. So wait a minute, so where's the bone? If you shoot a .22 through someone's head, I don't care how many times you shoot it, the lead's so soft, it's like a sponge, it's gonna have bone on it. So then I flew to Arizona, I hired Luke Haig. We shot out in the desert 22s through bovine, bone, and every single one of them was embedded with bone. So what do we know? We know that 22 was stuck in the Avery wood in the garage, and they just pried that thing out of there. Again, we found her DNA, the trace back to what DNA of hers they used to put on there. Because it also had wax on it, and they just happened to have her chapstick. So it's just staying on it. That's what we did. We're going to be like a wrecking crew with this evidence, and we're going to expose what they thought was a dunk shot case.
All right, so in honor of Wrongful Conviction Day, none other than Kathleen Zellner to sit here and talk to us about it. So, as I said before, I encourage everybody to check out the full awards ceremony. It was at Maryland, and it was the Justice Award. It's very, it's very interesting. Listening to Kathleen Zellner just talk about the law and talk about cases and wrongful convictions and post-conviction and that sort of stuff is just terribly interesting stuff. I'm just trying to pick out some of the bits here, so that more people will get to see them, because it is a rather long thing to watch. It's hour and a half or so, hour and 40 minutes, something like that. So it's fairly, but it's interesting. It's really interesting. So I encourage everybody to click the link in the information below and watch the entire thing. But in honor of Wrongful Conviction Day, this is what I wanted to talk about. Just that stuff that she was talking about was really interesting. You know what I mean? I mean, particularly before, when she was talking about how the courts are now, kind of refusing to apply the law the way that it really was intended to be, used in terms of the civil rights code or the civil whatever code it was that allowed people to be able to sue municipalities, i.e. your law enforcement or your local, prosecutors or city hall or whatever, right? It's the thing that allows that. But the courts have taken it now and have interpreted it in such a way that they grant pretty much almost complete immunity to those entities, to the municipalities, to the police officer, to the crooked DA or the overzealous DA. You know what I mean? There's complete immunity instead of, like limited immunity for certain little things, right? It's just complete blanket immunity. They basically just can fear they don't have to fear anything because nothing will ever happen. And that's what she's talking about there. And she was talking about how that goes one step further with AEDPA. I mean, at this point, it's impossible for you to get from your state with your case to try to get it in front of the federal courts, really, because AEDPA is so ridiculously, I mean, it has such a ridiculously high threshold, and it's preventing right now what we need. We need the federal courts to be thumping the lower courts, the state courts. We need them, we need them to be kind of thumping them a little bit, going, look, this is the law. This is the Supreme Court, of the United States made this law about juveniles, and especially the mentally limited juveniles, and that that blood on the suspect is not the only hallmark of a coerced confession. Another very good quote from one of the amicus briefs filed for Brendan when he was appealing the Supreme Court for a writ of certiorari. So much interesting stuff that can be learned following these cases, folks. I encourage everybody to learn up. I have videos about all the amicus briefs. If you look through my videos, if you go into search and type in amicus briefs, they'll probably pop right up for you. Boom. And they're interesting, and you can go to the full documents if you want. You can watch the video where I cover some of what I think are the main things in it, but you can also go to the full document below and the info below to find the full document. So, little suggestion for everybody: wrongful convictions are something that we need to notice and take notice of, particularly the way that they're happening with youth, particularly mentally limited youth. It's really disturbing, and it just seems like the system right now just wants to keep rolling on the way it is, and they don't want to have to treat juveniles any differently than they treat adults, and that's got to change. It just has to change. So they're fighting it, Not all. Some counties and stuff across the country have, are forward thinking and have already instituted certain things like, well, for instance, conviction integrity units, CIUs they call them, right? These are things that sometimes the prosecutors' offices of various around the country, or even just DA's offices and stuff, will have these conviction integrity units, and what they will do is periodically go and look into old cases and look and see if there's been any further investigation that's been done, and if there's anything that looks like and they like actively look for cases where they may have gotten it wrong, especially if new evidence has popped up that now weakens some of their case that they made, and it's that sort of thing where they're actually actively reviewing it for themselves internally. The good thing about that, folks, the reason why that's so good, right, is because it removes the adversarial process, right? Okay, if a defense lawyer comes at that DA's office or whatever and wanting to overturn the conviction of one of those cases, they're going to want to fight tooth and nail. It's going to take, as long as it takes. They're going to be appeals and this and everybody, it's going to take forever to get ironed out usually. On the average, the wrongful convictions tend to take 10 to 15 years to get ironed out, really, when the adversarial process is engaged. So the reason why the conviction integrity units are so good is because they remove that process, and we got the actual DA's offices and stuff like that looking and finding their own mistakes and correcting them. And by doing that, it number one, limits the amount of time the person spends, and if there is any compensation that is owed, it's minimal. Instead of being for a 10 or 15 year stint, it's for maybe only a year or maybe 5 years or so, and it's a much different compensation. Okay, not saying that they shouldn't be compensated because it's a short time. I'm just saying it's much less than what they have to pay after spending all the money they spend to fight it, and then after that they have to pay. Right? That's why conviction integrity units are good. That's why they're important. That's why everybody should be finding out if their local DA's office are considering using conviction integrity units, because, like I said, it removes the adversarial process. It's the quickest, easiest way to right wrongful convictions. And if you have a conscientious county, then you want a conviction integrity unit there. Anyway, that's about it for Wrongful Conviction Day, folks. If you haven't already, please hit subscribe, and we'll see ya.